You're listening to God, Law, and Liberty with David Fowler and Gary Humble. We're putting culture on a collision course with the truth.
Well, hi, and welcome to another episode of God, Law, and Liberty. I'm Gary.
And I'm David.
And, we're not letting the coronavirus get us down over here, in fact.
No.
But we... Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to say here at Fact, as people will recognize, I'm at the regular studio location, and I was going to issue an urgent call for help because the team locked me in here, and quarantined me at the office, and then everybody left. But no, I actually just happened to be in the office today to check some mail. But we're trying some new technology, and it's kind of exciting to me.
Yeah, well, we definitely hope that, for you, all of you out there, that you and your family are safe and that you're faring well through what are incredibly interesting times. But in any case, we're excited to still be able to come to you with today's episode. So we're going to talk today about kind of the war that we have with the words that we use, and
a word
David,
war.
Word war. Kind of intro into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I've got a good friend that wrote an article, sometime last year, I guess it was, but it ties into a recent decision from a court. But he actually wrote an article called Word Wars, I think it was. It's found on Public Discourse if anybody'd like to read it, and I would encourage you to. But he noted at the beginning of his article that Chesterton had said that words are the only things worth fighting about. And even Nietzsche, who would, of course, come from a completely opposite viewpoint than the Catholic Chesterton, wrote that unspeakably more depends on what things are called than what they are. And words really are important. And we see this in what's taking place in the legal community, which is why we're bringing it up. And we're actually moving towards a society in which we're going to find it difficult to know how to communicate well. For example, now, if a man's not sure he's a man or a woman and wants to be called they, and you write a sentence and say, Bob woke up to a sunny day, his friends enjoyed the day as well, they went to the beach. Well, who went to the beach? Bob? Or Bob and his friends? Who is they anymore? See, we would have said he went to the beach, which meant he left his friends at home. Or we would have said his friends went to the beach. Or we would have said they went to the beach, which might imply it was Bob and his friends. But see, we're losing the ability to communicate accurately because we're losing our vocabulary. And the thing that's not appreciated that I think Chesterton was getting at is that words are developed to reflect a reality, an underlying reality. I think it's interesting that one of the first things that God had Adam do, it says, is to name the animals. Naming is important. For those Christians that are baptized, particularly as infants, the pastor will say, and what is the Christian name that you've given to this child? When we baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So what we name things, what we call things, are very important because they reflect an identity that is supposed to be true about those things. And we're losing that. So that's kind of the topic for today. And I don't know if you have it in front of you since I'm not there, but there was a decision from a court recently that caught my attention, and let me just tell the listeners what it was. It was a professor, I think he was in Ohio actually, who had a transgender student that I can't remember if it was a male who now identified as a female or vice versa, but the person wanted to have him use the pronouns associated with how the person perceived themselves to be, not according to their biology. And he said, no, you're a man, and I'm going to refer to you as he and his and him. if you want to be called Clara, that's fine. You're Clara. But Clara is a he, a him, and a his. Well, he got fired. And so he sued in federal court, was represented by Alliance Defending Freedom. And his case was dismissed. He had sued on First Amendment free speech grounds, and he lost. And one of the things that was interesting in the opinion is that the court noted that, yeah, we do have free speech, but they said when you're in certain environments, you give up some of that freedom of speech. So, when you're an employee of a company, they can tell you, what you need to do at work. If you don't like it, find another employer. So there was some of that, but there was an interesting statement in the court's opinion that caught my eye that ties into this. So why don't you share that statement with our listeners or viewers, actually?
Well, yeah, I believe it's where, they say, although public universities may not force professors to endorse or eschew specific viewpoints, the First Amendment does not bar a public university from requiring that its faculty treat each other and their students with civility.
Yeah. Now,
so
it's an interesting statement.
So the question there is, so who defines what is civil? And I suppose in this case, what they're saying is that each university gets to decide for themselves what is civil. I don't know.
Well, I think they would certainly leave it up to each university to decide that. I don't think this was it wasn't a case of a constitutional right for me to be called her or she. It was a case of a professor who said, I'm not calling David her, I'm calling him, But what was fascinating is the court says this is just a case of civility, nothing more. Nothing more. Now, if they had tried to tell the professor what viewpoints he should have on things, how he should teach about capitalism, that it's good or it's bad, or socialism is good or bad, or his perspective on the issues that led to the Civil War or World War II or whatever it might be. Well, now there, we've got some freedom of speech issues, and he ought to have pedagogical teaching license and liberty there. But this is just a matter of civility. It's not expressing or endorsing a viewpoint. Now stop and think about that. When somebody comes to me and says, biology doesn't matter. Bodies are immaterial. What I am is solely defined by my subjective mental state. And therefore, Carl can be Carla, and you have to call Carl she and her. Have you not just endorsed a particular viewpoint? And is not endorsing that viewpoint and accepting it what makes you uncivil? You see? So this is a bad example, but I'll give it anyway. In the United States, this will tell how old I am. I grew up, in college in the disco era, Saturday Night Fever and all that sort of stuff. And I was in a song and dance group at the local university, and we all knew how to do what they called shag dance, and that was one of the dances of shag. So we go to England.
That had another meaning from. I wasn't back in the in those times.
Well, yeah, and maybe that 20 years is the difference. But that was a dance called the shag. So we go to England, and we were out somewhere one night, and one of the girls in our group asked a guy if he wanted to shag. Well, it meant to have a intimate relationship, and he was sort of floored that she would walk up to him and want to know if he wanted to shag right there in the discotheque, but the point of the story is, see, words do have a certain meaning, and so if you have an underlying worldview that says shag is a dance and it's okay, then you don't mind saying that. But you wouldn't walk up to a stranger with a different worldview who thinks it means sexual intimacy and say you want to shag. And see, your ability to communicate then even begins to break down.
Yeah.
And she, relayed the story as we were on the bus that she said, the guy kind of looked at me in a shock, and I said, well, it's a dance in America. And he's like, oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what we meant, or whatever it was. So this is important. See, they would say to him, you don't have to endorse a worldview. But see, our worldview also determines what's civil. Now, I'll give another sort of bad example, but I read it in some book somewhere, and I thought it was a good one. Is everybody knows that you don't kill innocent human beings and you don't eat them, right? But some of the more Aboriginal, say, tribes or whatever they would be called that in fact eat other human beings, they would say, well, of course you don't do that. But the other tribe is not innocent. That's why we kill and eat them. See, that wouldn't be an uncivil thing to them. And so this court is in essence saying, you don't understand, Professor. We now do not believe that bodies and anatomy and biology matter. That's what makes your failure to call him a her uncivil. And I hope people appreciate that when and sometimes I think, Gary, a lot of Christians think this is just crazy stuff. This is just nonsense. We just lost our minds. And it's like, no, we really haven't.
No,
what's happened is we've lost. What's happened is we've redefined all the terms, and you're still living in the old world.
Yeah, and that matters, especially when these things come to courts and whatnot. And
sure.
So in Jeff's article that you were mentioning earlier, it's one of these quotes you pulled out from the opinion in Whole Woman's Health, Hellerstedt, that in the opinion there's a quote. Abortion in Texas was extremely safe with particularly low rates of serious complications and virtually no deaths occurring on account of the procedure. Well, kind of depends on how you figure in death.
What a human being is.
Yeah,
what a death
absolutely.
Is. Yeah. And he notes in the article, for instance, on the abortion issue, he said, and notice that we, instead of refer to it as an unborn child or my baby, which women do today, they'll still say, oh, I'm expecting, it's my little baby. I can feel my baby move. We move in law to the concept of a fetus, and we take the medical terms. And so we're able to sort of cover over our guilty knowledge that we're aborting and killing a human life. And so we make this ironic statement that, abortion is virtually safe and there are no deaths. Well, there's one death in every abortion, at least one. And what's encouraging, though, is that we found, for instance, in the Sixth Circuit opinion recently regarding the Kentucky ultrasound law and an Eighth Circuit case within the last couple of years dealing with sonogram laws, that the courts were referring to them as unborn child, the unborn person, the unborn. So
that was encouraging to hear from the court. Yeah,
that's a signal that we realize really what we're doing here. It's putting it back in the face of the American people a little bit to say, you realize we're killing unborn children, unborn babies. In fact, in one of the opinions, the case of Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, which is currently being re-examined with this case out of Louisiana that we've talked about. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments on it, I guess early March, maybe. That in that Hellerstedt case, it's not Hellerstedt, it's Gonzalez versus Carhart, the court upheld the ban on partial birth abortion. And in the majority opinion, they used the words child, unborn, human being, words like that. I don't remember what all they were, but Ginsburg went apoplectic in her dissent about the fact that they were no longer using the scientific and medical terms, and they were using such terms as the unborn child and the preborn baby or whatever it was, because she realized, when we're confronted with what is actually there and people know what a child is, we still know what a child is. But no, you don't kill a child. Oh, but could you kill a fetus? Well, sure, you can kill a fetus because we don't see them as the same. So words are the things we really need to fight over. We need to, in our briefs, for instance, and when we're talking about abortion, we need to refer to unborn children, unborn babies.
Absolutely.
So that people know what we're talking about. Right. So I thought that was a great statement. Going back to this transgender issue here, though, that's particularly of interest to me because we have a lawsuit taking place right now in our own state in which this issue exists. And there's a statement that Jeff Schaefer makes in this article. He says that Richard Hooker, who was an Englishman and quite a political philosopher, had written years ago that to treat in language those things that are in fact different as if they're the same is, quote, the mother of all error, because our language gets confused, right, and we don't know what's what. And he says, upon converting the words of male and female significance into markers of selectable states of mind without physical referent, the innovators posit a new humanity. These are not just different words, a new understanding of what it means to be human. Now, what's happened in our state is back last year, I think it's 3 or 4 individuals, all adults, had transitioned, and they have sued the state of Tennessee for the right to change their birth certificate to now reflect their actual sex. And there are lots of reasons that would sound kind of crazy. Well, you were born a male, you admit you were born a male. Why would you change your birth certificate when you're 20, 30 years of age? That's what you were when you were born. Now, what I'd like for our listeners and viewers to appreciate is that the Attorney General filed a motion and a brief to dismiss the case, but in arguing it, he referred to people like you and me as cisgendered. Now, some of our listeners may not even know what a cisgendered person is, but
major normal.
Major normal, yeah, that's right. So, in other words, your body and your subjective mental states, that they're in harmony with each other.
If you're cisgender, it means that if you're a man, you're a man, and if you're a woman, you're a woman. That's what it means.
That's right. And so the others are now transgender. So transgender had to come up for a word to designate what I was, because it's no longer sufficient to simply refer to me as a male. Those embodied states of reality based on biology for them in their worldview do not exist anymore. The word male doesn't mean anymore what you and I grew up understanding it to mean. So consequently, because now sex, male and female, is not biological and anatomical or DNA coded, we have to have a word for those whose subjective mental states about themselves are consistent with those biological realities. So you have to be cisgendered.
Well, what's interesting about that is, it's important to understand whenever we use those words, our words matter, and if we start using the language, well, then we sort of show that we've accepted the worldview. So when we have an attorney general that starts referring to people as cisgender, well, then he's sort of signaling, right, by his choices of the words that he uses, that he's now accepting this new worldview and redefining what it is to be human. It's a problem.
That's right. He's actually conceded the point. You're not transgendered under the worldview that underlies our law. You're actually confused. That's what you are. You're not transgendered. But now that would sound mean to go through his brief and be referring to the confused plaintiffs, versus the unconfused citizens That sounds mean and unkind. But what I understand is the Attorney General said it was just easier to use those words because that's kind of the words they're using. But see, that's the point of how we began this whole conversation. Words are the only things worth fighting for. They're the only thing worth fighting for. If male and female don't mean what I think they mean, then they're going to mean what you think they mean. Yeah. And then that's going to change everything. Okay? Now, it's not going to just change the birth certificate law, but here's why the Attorney General is in a world of hurt and trouble in that lawsuit if the plaintiffs want to make a mess for him. And I almost hate to say this publicly, but they could make a mess for the Attorney General because he's already conceded way too much. Most of our listeners and our viewers don't know this, but probably 2 years ago, could have been as long as 3 years ago, I represented 73 legislators, 20-something senators and 50-something representatives, trying to intervene in a lawsuit in Knoxville where two women had married. One of the women had had a child by insemination, and they were now getting divorced. The question was over custody rights and who were the parents of the child. The court originally said that one of the women had no right to the child by virtue of biology, okay, because clearly, she didn't get her wife pregnant, okay, said that you don't have any physical connection to the child, so you have no natural rights of parentage there, and you didn't adopt the child legally, so you don't have any legal status as a mother. You're just an outsider like anybody else would be. And just because you live in the household and you carry out certain functions doesn't convert you into a mother for a birth certificate purpose. Okay. So the court, the non-biological mother objected and said, well, wait a minute, this violates Obergefell and the equal rights of same-sex married couples and heterosexual married couples, because we are the same thing. Now, let's go back to what Jeff Hooker said. When you start calling the same thing, when you start calling different things the same thing, that's the mother of all error. Okay, so a man and a woman and their relationship, marital relationship, is, the court is saying, in essence, the same as a relationship between two women. And now you're not treating them equally. Well, wait a minute, though. The man actually can get the woman pregnant. The other woman can't get the other woman pregnant. They're not the same thing, at least.
It's a pretty major difference.
Yeah, at least in terms of the relationship to a child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but here's what happened. The Attorney General came into court and he said, well, we have a statute. We created it in 1977, even before my time. And it dealt with the fact that people at that point were starting to increasingly go to fertility specialists. Often they were using their husband's own sperm, but they were using the husband's sperm to create the baby where they were having trouble conceiving naturally. And so they passed a statute to make it clear who the child, belonged to, who the parents were. And it says in the birth certificate section, not in the family law section, but the birth certificate section, who are we going to stick on this birth certificate? It says that when a married woman with the consent of her husband has a child by artificial insemination, the child will be considered that of the husband and wife. Okay, so here's what's happened. We're not going to worry that you may have gone to a sperm bank and maybe the biological dad is different. We're just going to say if you've gotten pregnant by this means and you're married, we're not going to ask where the sperm came from. We're just going to say it was the decision of the husband and wife, the man and the woman, and y'all will be deemed the parents on the birth certificate, the mother and father on the birth certificate of that child. We're not going to get behind it to say, where did the sperm come from? Good. Okay, great. We're going to respect their privacy. The non-biological mother used that statute to say, well, see, you will treat a husband and wife as both getting to go on a birth certificate, but I can't go on the birth certificate with my wife. The court had originally said, well, you're not a husband. The statute refers to a husband and wife, and you're a wife and a wife. And so by definition, you don't qualify as a husband. I'm sorry, you need to go get another statute passed or something. But I'm not free to reinterpret those words. Well, in for the rescue came our state's attorney general. Yay. And I'm, yeah. Well, you just got fired for that. I'm assuming that was sarcastic, right? Yeah. So the attorney general comes in. I'm actually reading from the brief. And he says, well, if you do that, if you treat the word husband to mean a male, well, then that might violate Obergefell, and we're not really treating same-sex couples the same. And that might make our statute unconstitutional. Now let me stop right there. First of all, one of the things that we've talked about is courts only make judgments between private parties, and the states are free to distinguish away and say, well, I understand that you're entitled to a license, and that might entitle you to certain tax deductions. But wait a minute, we're not sitting here saying that the relationship between mother, father, and child is the same in a same-sex relationship as it is in a natural procreative relationship. They are different, and you're going to have another court opinion to force me to go there.
Right.
But our attorney general just lays down, takes the principle that getting joint tax returns filed is equal to being on birth certificates somehow, and we're going to violate the fundamental underlying principle of Obergefell, which he's now extrapolating and expanding. And he's saying, yeah, gosh, our statute might be unconstitutional because we let a husband and wife be treated this way, but not two wives. So here's the brief he files. Let me read this, and this may fit your comment. So he said, so because it might be unconstitutional, both the word husband and the wife would be properly construed to mean spouse. Oh, we don't need to use words husband and wife anymore. Just construe them to mean spouse and spouse. See how we become androgynous?
Yeah, that's you're right. That's exactly what I was going to comment on. I mean, it's one thing to suppose we get ourselves in a mess when we suppose that courts make laws, and we've been talking about that for several episodes. How and every state does it, right? And we've certainly done it with the Obergefell ruling. But this idea that court opinions and court rulings are actually public policy. They've taken on the job of each state legislature. But it's a whole other thing in this particular instance where you have an attorney general singularly saying, well, it's cool to adjust the law by redefining the words written in that policy. Well, just think about that for a minute. Imagine all of the laws we can magically change without going through any sort of court or legislative process, simply by declaring that, oh, well, the word in this statute, it doesn't mean that anymore. It means this. Yeah. We could change any law we wanted to and completely override the legislative process just by deciding that, this word, just like the attorney general did. Well, husband doesn't mean a man anymore. We're just going to,
just means
we're just going to mean spouse. But that's not what the statute says. No, that's not what the legislature passed.
Right. But the judge bought the argument because, the attorney general came in and made it. And I went to the Court of Appeals and I argued that, hey, you are rewriting the law. Everybody knows what a husband and a wife is. And if we want to say spouses, we can say spouses. You can't do that. And one of the justices on that Court of Appeals panel, who now is a key advisor to our governor, said she was offended that I was there representing legislators and sticking my nose into a private domestic matter. And I said, Your Honor, I'm not trying to stick my nose or that of the legislators in a private domestic matter. I'm trying to keep the court from rewriting our statutes and usurping the authority of the legislature. But she didn't get it.
Right.
Oops, I probably said too much.
No, that's good.
But she didn't get it. And that's part of the arrogance of courts, is that we'll just rewrite it. Now I'm going to give you another little war story. I went to a legislator, a lawyer. I won't mention his name because this is so damning. But I went to this lawyer, bright guy. I said, look, we have a bill that says that the words mother, father, husband, and wife shall be given their ordinary and natural common meaning. Now, that's just restating what the normal rule of construction is. Courts give words their normal meaning. If the word's not ambiguous, I would say the word husband's not ambiguous, then we don't need to construe it. We just apply it. I said, would you carry the bill? His answer was no. And he said, why? I said, well, the courts are going to redefine them. And he said, well, this stuff is so controversial. Maybe it's just better if courts do that. And I looked at him and I said, you're just abdicating your legislative responsibility to define the words in your statutes.
Yeah, he didn't have to take the cultural heat and the fallout. He didn't have to worry about the election coming up if he just relinquishes that to the court. Yeah. And
you know, that whole attitude's now infected the whole General Assembly. You talk about anything with human sexuality, and they run like their pants are on fire, most of them. But do you see the problem with our government when the Attorney General takes a holding in Obergefell about licenses and extrapolates it to something that's completely different? Now, look, I'll concede that whether my wife and I get a tax deduction really doesn't depend on whether I'm a man or a woman, or it's two women or two men. I concede that point. There's nothing so distinct about two women married and my wife and I married that a tax deduction doesn't seem to apply equally. But when it comes to biological relationships, our relationships and our marriages are in fact different.
Yeah.
They are different. And so the Attorney General took something that said, okay, we have to treat them equally, and that may mean I have to give tax deductions or maybe property rights the same. But now, wait a minute, I'm not changing biological relationships. I'm not pretending that women get women pregnant, okay? But that's the argument that he made. Now, since then, or even actually before then, the Department of Health took it upon themselves under Governor Haslam to start adding two married women to a birth certificate. Now, they had no authority to do that. They just did what the Attorney General did, and nobody sued them yet.
No different than when they changed the marriage form.
That's right. No different when the Governor Haslam changed the marriage form. So now they're issuing birth certificates showing a child has two mothers. Well, that is a biological lie. Now, here's the problem. Let's go back now to the birth certificate case. The Attorney General in one lawsuit up in Knoxville argued that, well, hey, biology does not matter when it comes to a birth certificate. They're not reflecting a historical biological reality. We're putting two women on there as mothers. Then you run over into the transgender case about birth certificates for them, and you say his argument is, this birth certificate statute reflects historical facts that deal with biology. That's why you can't change it. Well, not if you go by what you said in Knoxville, because the birth certificate that we're now issuing that has two mothers is not reflecting historical biological facts. So he's put himself in a pickle.
Yeah. There's actually there's a really great quote from this article having to do with exactly just that. Part of this article says, they have imagined away the organic community of familial persons and removed it from language to be replaced by an aggregate of self-defining ghostly units contractually clustering. Wow, that's a mouthful. To paraphrase Isaiah, they have given birth to wind. And this is really good. The new person is loosed from relational physicality into the ether of abstraction. Vanquished is the family web of derivation, relation, and connective permanence. We are now radically alone.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of big words and a really complicated way to say it. But that's
I didn't
really,
write that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, man, this is David Fowler words right here. But
yeah, no, I'm not that good. But yeah, go ahead with your point. I'm interrupted you, but
well, no, that was really good. The fact that that's exactly what we've created. I mean, we've completely by using these new definitions, we've completely disconnected ourselves from everything that is innately human. And instead of this world of connectedness and legacy and generational, history. And I think about how much we crave that, right? I mean, look at these ancestry.com, and that's all you see. People are so enthralled with finding out who they are because we live in such a connected, disconnected world.
yeah,
But we continue though.
disconnected
to go through the motion of disconnecting ourselves from everything that would give us that sense of connectedness.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this, but in one of our early podcasts, we were talking about Abraham Kuyper. You remember he was talking about organic development of society and states. And see, we're really kind of saying there isn't anything organic anymore. It's all artificial and constructed. And we're losing those organic ties. And when those are lost, we really are, as Jeff said, alone. There's an interesting verse. I just thought of this. Wow, this gives kind of new meaning to it. In Psalm 27, there's a passage where David is, he's surrounded by enemies and foes and people that breathe out violence and all this stuff. And he says, the one thing I ask of you, Lord, is I'd really love to dwell in your temple and reflect on your beauty. And you said, seek my face, and I seek your face. And then there's a sentence that goes on towards the end where he says, even though my mother and father desert me, you will pick me up. And I was thinking about that this morning, and as you said this, it now came to my mind. If push comes to shove, who back then, when David's writing, would you have said, at least these folks have my back? You'd say, my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
They got my back.
Yep.
My dad would have said that. He said, there were things that I knew. Dad had my back. Now, if I went out and did something terrible, I would suffer the consequences. But the point is what the psalmist is saying there. This is such a beautiful thing. God would never abandon me, even though my mother and my father might. And so if there are any of those who listen to this who say, I am one of those disconnected people, whether it's because of divorce or my dad ran off or my mom and I never knew them or I was created in a test tube. Yeah, you've got that awful pain. And what David is saying in that psalm is that God's not that kind of heavenly father. He will never leave you or forsake you. He will take you up. Wow, thanks, Gary. I'd never put that together.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Yeah, that's what he's saying. Naturally, see, these organic bonds are here, but now we're breaking them apart, and it all falls apart. Wow. And I'll close sort of with one other thought, at least going back to the legal one, where the Attorney General is going to get himself in trouble, is the Supreme Court did another terrible thing back in 2017. And it was a case called Pavon v. Smith. And it dealt with Arkansas's birth certificate laws. And a same-sex, two women sued, and they wanted to both be on the birth certificate of the child. The Arkansas Supreme Court said, no, our laws are here to reflect historical realities and biological facts and so on and so forth. And y'all don't fit. In other words, the Supreme Court was kind of making the argument that I was saying the Attorney General should make. Well, the two women appealed to the United States Supreme Court, arguing they had a constitutional right to be both listed as mothers. Now, the the thing that's interesting about the court's decision is that the state had argued, and I'm quoting from the opinion, that birth certificate laws are not a benefit that attends marriage. It attends birthing. You don't get birth certificates because you're married. You get a birth certificate because you're the biological parent of a child. I don't have to be married to be listed as a parent or father on my child's birth certificate, right? I mean, and if I don't want to be listed, the mother can prove paternity, enlist me on there. Okay. But the court went on to say, because of this insemination type statute, and that Arkansas was allowing men to be, husbands to be put on birth certificates when there was artificial insemination and we don't know who really the father is. And because of some other things, the court said Arkansas makes birth certificates about more than genetics. So now it's unconstitutional. Well, our Attorney General has just argued us into saying that our birth certificates have nothing to do with historical, biological realities. That's what he did in the case over in Knoxville with the birth certificate. But now that he's being sued by transgender people, he's flipping back to it's historical, biological. He's given up the game. I mean, I would love to represent these transgendered couples just to argue against the Attorney General. Right. But that's what we've done.
Well, and as we close up, something that you said a while back I think it's an important point to bring up. This whole idea of don't all these legislators and people that run for office, they should know this stuff, right? They should know how laws are made. They should know that courts don't make laws, especially in dealing with marriage and all of these cultural issues that everybody's getting sued over and everyone's losing elections over and creating all these news cycles that we see. But something that you said made me realize that, it's not that they don't know. It's not that they don't understand their responsibility in creating public policy. It's the simple fact that they are perfectly fine with letting the court take the heat so that they don't have to. I mean, they're willing to give all of this stuff up and let the courts decide whatever they want to, even if it replaces the policy of our state, so that they don't have to cast a vote and take the heat from the LGBT community and possibly lose an election over it. They just rather not deal with it and just leave it in the courts instead of dealing with it legislatively. Before you said that, I can't remember when it was, a few weeks ago in a conversation that I had never thought of that. And I think I think it's a big part of the root of the mess. We don't have men and women willing to stand on principle anymore. We have men and women that will do whatever it takes to get reelected. And that's where we find ourselves.
Yeah. I think we certainly have some who just don't get the worldview issue. They just don't get it. They'll use the word cisgender and they'll never realize they've just lost the war of words. Then we have some who do get it, but have no courage at all.
Right.
And so between those two, that doesn't leave you many who get the worldview issue and the political, constitutional, I got the courage to do it. Yeah, that leaves you a really small group of people in the middle.
Oh, there's not many.
No. Right now,
but thankfully,
if you ask me in the
do have
Assembly,
a few in
I'd
Tennessee.
say we do have some. And they can lead others if they will.
I was going to ask you, how many do we have, David? But don't answer that question. Not on the air.
Well, let's put it in this way. I will answer this question.
Okay.
When it comes to marriage in the state Senate and taking the lead to defend our state's right to define marriage as a man and a woman, now I'm talking about taking the lead, not saying they won't vote for it, no saying they won't follow. I suspect there are no more than 2 at best, maybe just 1.
Wow.
Now they may vote right, but provide the leadership to put their name on the bill and file it, and that's Janice Bowling. And we hope to pipe her in here someday soon in the next episode or two to talk to her about her.
It'd be great to hear her heart on some of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, David, thanks again.
Hey, great show.
Yeah, stay safe out there during the whole coronavirus thing that we're still in the middle of. But it's really great to be able to connect like this. And so hey, as always, like, share. Thanks for listening. You can always email us at info@factn.org, factn.org, and we look forward to talking with you again. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. God, Law, and Liberty is a podcast of the Family Action Council of Tennessee. We are a 100% supporter-funded nonprofit advocating for family, life, marriage, and religious liberty. For more information, please visit us at www.facttennessee.org. That's factennessee.org. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @FactTennessee.